Welcome to Hospitality Talks. My name is Sam-Erik and I'm with my co-host Abid, and we run regular these Hospitality Talks discussions. And Abid, I think we have a great show today. I mean, this is now looking forward to how things will evolve in the hospitality and the tourism industry. And congratulations, you've been getting a great panel together for this week, for today's episode. We will also have 3 episodes relating to the hospitality reboot. So I'm very excited about these episodes. So may I pass it now to Abid to introduce the panelist?
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much. Happy Monday to everybody. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who are joining us live on different platforms, whether it is Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, it's great to have you back with us. As Sam mentioned, we have a terrific panel. Up until now, we've been talking about how we got to the point that where we at. And now, since the globe is starting to look at restarting the economies, opening up hospitality, we thought it was a perfect time to pivot and look into the future. We've got a terrific panel with different disciplines. So without further ado, let me first bring on Stephen Rushmore, who is President and CEO of HVS. Stephen, welcome to Hospitality Talks.
Hi there. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Abid.
Well, thanks for taking the time, Stephen. You obviously have a much broader, wider view of the industry. Let's do a little bit of business check. Which markets are you seeing that are slightly more buoyant than the others? I know a lot of places are still shut down. Do you see any trends starting as we speak?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's still really early and it's changing all the time. So we're expecting the leisure markets and the more economy segments to recover faster as people are getting a little bit cabin fever and looking to get out a little bit more, and more in the economy segment as well, because a lot of companies there's not group business, there's not much corporate demand, so it's a lot of leisure travel at a lower rated price point. And the extended stay segment as well has been faring better on a relative basis than other market segments.
Stephen, is the different segments, when you look at from a major MSA point of view, are you seeing the suburbs that are faring better than downtown areas? Obviously, corporate market demand is way down at this particular point. You talked about leisure starting to creep back. As you know, we have Adam on our panel today, and we'll look forward to hearing what he's seeing in the trends. But talk a little bit about some of the major markets within U.S. terms, if there are any particular markets that are bouncing back.
Yeah, so I can't tell you any specific markets right now that are outperforming others, and it's changing on a constant, every day it changes. So there's that, and it hasn't been long enough to really have any particular patterns. But in general, in conversations I've had with hotel owners, the more rural properties are seeing, so more of the secondary cities, tertiary cities are performing better than the ones that are dependent on international travel, air that depend on the air travel. And those properties are seeing higher occupancies in RevPAR.
I think that's probably consistent with what we've been hearing whilst we try to gain the consumer confidence. There are still a lot of hurdles that we have to overcome. So the drive traffic appears to be improving. There was an article that I read a couple of days ago from STR that for the first time in a very long time, they saw nearly 1 million reservations processed industry-wide in North America. Whilst that number still is way too small to really get us anywhere, but it is a silver lining, if you would. Stephen, talk about what is occurring on the supply side of things. Demand, we already know it is a bit of an induced downturn, but talk about the supply side of things. How has that been impacted with this pandemic?
Sure. Well, you have a few different elements of that supply. You have a number of hotels that have suspended operations and just waiting for the demand to return. And so that's a sort of a temporary reduction of supply, which hasn't really happened much in our history. 9/11 and Katrina really being some of the more recent examples of that occurring. But typically what happens, taking a look at some of the historical downturns, supply over the last 20 years, every year with exception of one, there's always been supply growth. And whenever there's the sort of the inflection point on a recession, supply usually takes about 2 or 3 years for the supply growth to sort of smooth out, to even out. So I would anticipate that supply is going to be an issue for about 3 years. It'll probably take 3 years before the supply growth and the demand growth has sort of reached its equilibrium and rebuild from there. So anyone who's thinking about doing any kind of development, certainly this is very relevant in the United States and perhaps elsewhere in the world, probably wouldn't be prudent to have anything come online for at least 3 years' time.
Well, I'm sure you involved in doing feasibilities as we speak. In if it's a new build, it's a couple of years down the line before the facilities starts to operate. Do you think some of these hotels that have been shut down because of Corona, will they ever reopen? Is there an adaptive reuse that is being discussed at this particular juncture?
Yeah, so our modeling has it that we're expecting pretty much every hotel to reopen. Realistically, that's not going to happen because there's always closures, but there's also new supply that comes on as well. So we're not in the period of about 3 or 4 years. We're not expecting there to be any significant. We're expecting the supply to be sort of back where it was at prior levels. That those hotels that have suspended operations will resume operations. But yeah, as far as building a hotel and planning for a hotel, we are doing feasibility studies, especially outside the United States, on a continual basis because it takes much longer to actually get a hotel in operation. But in the United States, we have seen a slowdown in the number of feasibility studies, but we'll probably pick up in about 9 to 12 months or so.
Before I turn it over to Sam, one other question. What are your thoughts on the alternative accommodation platforms, the likes of Airbnb? I know in major metros, particularly New York, that had created a whole additional supply side of things. Do you think that's going to be impacted in any way?
There's no question in the near term, from the health and safety standpoint, I think they're going to be facing challenges there. But in the longer term, you've had the whole shared economy accommodations really started at the beginning of the last cycle. And so there was a lot of speculative investments from people who've never experienced a down cycle. And those people are getting severely pinched right now, and probably will have learned a lesson, and many of which probably will get back in the game again. I could take, for example, when I used to live in Cape Town, South Africa for a couple of years, and just about everybody I knew has a flat, an Airbnb flat that they rent out, and some of which are highly dependent upon that. And right now they're getting their tourism economy is totally closed, and they're not getting any revenue. And so you're going to see a lot of people having trouble meeting their mortgage obligations for that, and probably not get back. And that will leave a bad taste in their mouth and not get back in the game. So I would expect 3 or 4 years from now, when things have recovered, that the shared economy supply will be much much lower than it was previously. How much more, I'm not sure, but I think it won't be the threat to the hospitality industry like it was in the previous cycle.
I heard a statistic earlier in the week that this investment real estate has been impacted dramatically. Not only that, the rental markets, particularly in major metros, is way down with the unemployment the way it is. People are not able to afford the rentals, so they're working out where they stay. So the real estate side of investment market is being impacted in an entirely different way. But Airbnbs and all these platforms that deal with the shared economy, it'll be interesting to see how that whole piece works out, or are all those dwellings come back on the market for transactions. A conversation on real estate investment point of view. Sam, over to you, please.
Yes, I have a question about your thoughts on the asset valuation trends in the different, for resorts, luxury, upper scale, and so on. How do you see that?
Yeah, so it's difficult to value an asset right now, as you could probably imagine, but it's something that we have to do as a company. And we do, historically, we've done about 4,000 of those a year just in the United States alone. And we continue to do them. And so the way that we're modeling it at the moment is that a buyer will come in very lowly leveraged or an all cash purchase. And then with the expectation that they would refinance in a couple of years' time. You putting that into our models, and we've run a few different scenarios. We expect the most likely outcome for valuation decline this year, and all the outcomes have a decline, as you can imagine, is a 27% decline, which is very significant.
Yeah.
But that being said, and even in the worst case scenario, which is around 35% decline for this year in 2020, we're expecting next year the rebound to be quite strong, and it take about 3 to 4 years to reach back to prior peaks. We do that with the assumption that there is a vaccine, and that about this time next year. That's what many people are saying, either a vaccine or treatment of it, so people will begin to feel comfortable traveling again. Even in the worst case scenario, where there's around a 35% value drop, the recovery next year, the following year, would be even stronger. So in around 2 to 3 years' time, all the scenarios will sort of be, no matter how severe it is, back recovering in the same place.
Well, thank you. Abid, you want to take over for the next question?
Stephen, we coming from a time in the industry that we've enjoyed growth for several years. Cap rates have been compressed in the past, and all of a sudden we find ourselves in this conundrum where there is absolutely no demand. We don't know when the vaccine will come about. Nobody really has any visibility relative to when or how this will come together, though we're all preparing for it. But unfortunately, nobody has the real visibility. How do you underwrite an asset in this environment?
Yeah, so as an appraiser or as an investor, how would you like me to answer that question?
Well, let's do the appraisal side of it first, because a lot of times that goes into the investment. That's right.
So getting the challenge right now is getting financing, and so you've seen a lot of people with cash on the side. As you mentioned, this previous cycle was quite long. You've had about 10 years. We've had 10 years of RevPAR growth, consecutive RevPAR growth, and typical is about 7. And so there is a lot of cash on the sides, and those people are ready to do cash deals. And so as far as underwriting things, you would, from a leveraging standpoint, you would assume that, and then a refinancing a couple of years from now. But from a valuation standpoint, at least the owners that I'm talking to, the developers that I'm talking to, they're taking a look at how the 2019 numbers, NOIs were looking, and applying a cap on that to give them some sense of, for the price that they could be paying. I'm also hearing that sort of the typical discount and price, I should say, excuse me, that people would be willing to pay for an asset as compared to 2019 is around the 20% range. That's what some people are willing to sell their asset at, and people would be willing to buy. That seems to be where the bid ask would possibly intersect at this point in time.
Hey, I was just about to ask you if you knew the delta between the bid and ask. So on an average, it's about 20%. I guess people that have equity built into these assets, sometimes it'll get wiped out because that's a massive difference as to where the asset might transact. Well, thanks for that insight, Stephen. Hang around, please. There are lots of other questions, but we will come right back to you. Let me bring our next guest, Adam Stewart, who is Deputy Chairman of Sandals Resorts International. Welcome to Hospitality Talk, Adam.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with all these esteemed gentlemen.
Well, thanks for taking the time. I know you are in the thick of figuring out how to reopen, not only for your own organization, but you're involved in a bigger, wider Jamaica tourism point of view. Help us understand what the tourism is like from a destination. We just talked about that maybe the drive traffic would be the first one, but you are entirely reliant on airlift. So help us understand what that looks like. What is a destination doing to attract the consumers back?
Sure. Yeah, Caribbean tourism has pros and cons to it. So when it was early March that this pandemic really got everyone's attention. I remember conversations very much where people thought this may have lasted 30 days, and then quite quickly 30 days turned into 90 days, and the aviation industry effectively became grounded. With that, most all of the Caribbean states closed their borders. Caribbean states don't have the kind of robust infrastructure that some of the developed world have around welfare programs. So we all then kicked into high gear, working with our governments, trying to find a way to keep, put in welfare and subsistence for our staff members and directly and indirectly relatable industries to tourism. So that all then kicked in, and then the last almost 60 days has been spent around drafting health and safety protocols for the reopening of our borders, how we get connectivity back and forth, and preparing in this new world of being able to prove that people can travel safely across borders. Now, the Caribbean, one of the opportunities of it is it acts like a small town. Everyone knows everyone. We work very closely with our governments on policy. There's a lot of public and private sector partnership. So they're acting very sort of robustly internationally. But because the community is so small and tight-knit, we can be quite agile and nimble. So our islands, Sandals Resorts is in 9 islands in 7 countries in the Caribbean. We have three different investments in the Bahamas. We're seeing island by island starting to announce formally their national protocols, which we all helped draft and work hand in hand. So, we all brought the practical knowledge of the operating side of running these resorts. And then working with our airline partners, to your point, as Stephen mentioned, the domestic staycation onshore United States is the largest source market to the Caribbean. We're in the backyard of the Americas, of course. We anticipate very much that the U.S. market will have a big drive with the staycation. But where we're very beneficial in the Caribbean is that we're going into in and around our 70th year of international travel within the Caribbean, and we have an amazing amount of robust, loyal customers that really love the eclectic colors of the Caribbean and the people and the culture and the music and the food. And so we have so we've been relying quite heavily and talking a lot to our past guests. There were 2 trains of thoughts on on the reinstating Caribbean tourism. One train of thought sort of took the narrative that people were sick and tired of 2020. It's a crazy year. We're just going to, wipe the slate clean, and our families are on our vacationing will take place in 2021. The other train of thought was that people are going to be, people would have been had pent up demand because they're locked up in their apartments, unable to move around as freely. And in effect, we've removed a part of people's freedoms, and international travel has become just a way of life. And what we're seeing certainly in our resorts is an amazing amount of demand of our customers that know us, they trust the brand, they know what we're capable of operationally. And of course, the Xer generation, particularly, and the millennial generation are not as fearful. They have not been as spooked as the boomer generation to get out there and to travel. They know that the statistics show that they are, highly, highly probable to get the virus and beat it in a worst case scenario. So we're seeing quite strong demand in the summertime, meaning particularly in July and the back end of the year, where people are indicating to us that they want to travel, that they've had a very tough last couple of months, but they want to get on with life. And that's very encouraging for us here in the Caribbean, where many of our states are between 70 and 90% dependent on tourism, as a region where the world's most tourism dependent region of the world, but we also believe that we're the world's most beautiful. So I could go on and on, but we're very united and pulling together.
Well, thank you for that. And quite candidly, I think a lot of the governments possibly now recognize the value of tourism and how much it contributes to the GDP of each of the economies. Absolutely. Typically, tourism has been sort of wrapped into another portfolio with another minister and doesn't get the seat at the table. But hopefully, if nothing else, we will gain some recognition how important this sector is, even though we might come out of it a bit battered and bruised, but it hopefully will get better attention to this. Now, when are you starting to reopen your resorts? You talked about July onwards, demand being very healthy. Is that when you're opening up? I know you have been very active in communicating with your guests as to when you will start, and talk a little bit about that as to how you've stayed in touch with your customers. When do you think you'll be able to welcome people back? Sure.
Well, it is completely contingent for us on two factors. When the country nationally announces a reopening of its borders, in some islands that's happened already, just happened, and of course when the airlift decide to come back. So we're very fortunate in that our companies, typically in the British Caribbean, the English-speaking Caribbean, is the largest customer for most of the U.S., the major carriers, and U.S., Canadian, and British. So we have very close relationships with them. We know that the airlines, particularly the non-long-haul travel, are very keen at getting back in the sky, and the Caribbean has always been a very profitable route for them to fly, particularly in the winter and summer months. So we are waiting to see what governments say. We know that St. Lucia, Grenada, the island of Antigua have all announced by June 4th will be open. So we will be operational in those islands on June 4th. The Bahamas has indicated just this past weekend that by July, but no specific date. They're doing it in a phased approach, which means they're on the cusp of announcing a date for international travel. They have U.S. free clearance in the Bahamas, which is a great benefit to air travelers. And Jamaica and some of the other islands that were in Barbados, the Turks and Caicos, are all on the cusp of making their announcements. And they'll be somewhere between, in my view, the middle of June. I'm not a government official, so this is only my opinion, somewhere between the middle of June and early July. Back to your point a bit about the governments recognizing the impact of tourism. In Jamaica, I chair a council called the Linkages Council, which are all the direct and indirect sort of connections to tourism. So entertainment, health and wellness, manufacturing, agriculture, et cetera, et cetera. Our debt to GDP in Jamaica has continued to fall over the last number of years, and it's predominantly because of the foreign exchange earnings that tourism has brought in our ability to repay the sins of our past. In Jamaica, 34% of our GDP is direct to tourism, and we've argued and squabbled over the years professionally about where tourism really has an impact. Aviation and transportation, for example, fall into the bucket of transportation, not tourism. But there would be no transportation sector surrounding tourism if it was not for tourism. So we've been able to connect some dots economically during this process, and we've been able to show that the real impact, directly and indirectly, on tourism is closer to 70% in the country of Jamaica. And so this has given us an opportunity to reset. It's given us an opportunity to sort of reimagine the future of tourism and get the stakeholders, citizens and government officials alike, to truly recognize that the leading industry and the industry that's going to be the dominant economic force going forward has been and will now very much be seated at the head table will be tourism.
Oh, that's fantastic. Quite candidly, if you look at it globally, even during the financial crisis, travel and tourism continued to grow at double digits. It was employing people. It continued to contribute, yet the industry does not have the cohesive voice to be heard. But I'm glad that people are starting to pay attention, particularly in nations that it has such a huge contribution. So please let us know if we can help in any way, and if there are any learnings that we can communicate to other nations, because this is very, very important. Sam, over to you, please.
Well, Adam, I want to just 2 points. One is that I took the liberty of going through to look at your website and how you are active on social media, and I just want to, I think it's something that you can give a masterclass to many of the fellow hoteliers, how you have handled this situation. You are very, very active on the most biggest platforms all the time, and I really like the Platinum Protocol of cleanliness. I mean, that really is something that people can learn something from, so I just want to point that out in this broadcast. So just compliments on this.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, if I could just comment on that for 2 seconds. We're operating with a very basic premise that until peace of mind is a critical feature to travel, and people's curiosity will always allow them to travel and inspire them to travel. So we have adopted 18 new measures within our resorts, including cleaning air filters and air conditioning systems on every stay rather than every fourth stay, on average every 30 days. Deep cleaning any soft furnishings, drapes, carpets every day, and ultimately rolling into putting a seal at the end of the housekeeping venture and cleaning every day on the room, cleaning every hour on the hour, if not sooner, all of our common areas. And these are things that are they've increased the cost of operations, no doubt. But it's a price that we must pay to bring peace of mind until we find a cure and move beyond this pandemic. And that's how our group has approached the program. So I appreciate the kind word.
Excellent. There's a question from David Miles. Does Sandals have any focus on energy resilience and renewable energy, given that COVID and upcoming hurricane season is likely to have an impact on existing systems?
Sure. So we have a division. Ironically, it's called the EHS team, the Environmental Health and Safety. It's been within our company for coming on 20 years. So we do things like make our own, desalination water. We then take that water and turn it into grey water to water our gardens. We use photovoltaic cells, high energy efficient equipment, heat recovery. So we take the heat off of the air conditioning systems and we use them to heat our pools. In the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos, where it can get a little chillier in what they call winter, but it's still Caribbean and it's still 75 or 80 degrees. So we actually have a division, and it's one of the divisions in the last economic downturn that many companies took out of their businesses. They got rid of their environmental programs, but environmental programs are like investing in the stock market. You got to have a long-term view, and when you do it, you stick to it. It really repays dividends. So 3 times a day, we meter and measure everything, our LPG, our diesel consumption, all of our consumables on property. Though 3 times a day, they're measured at the hotel level. They're sent up to headquarters, and we're making sure that we don't end up with random water leaks or anything that could be affecting. So at the core, environmental programs done well are just great business sense. So in the Caribbean, we have an average cost per kilowatt hour of about 35 cents a kilowatt hour. So we are probably 4 or 5 times less efficient than the developed world. And to counter that, we do a lot of things where, of course, you have to have air conditioning in restaurants and air conditioning in the room and all the features and amenity of a 5-star luxury operation. But we do factor in our design very heavily the East-West Caribbean trade winds and using the outdoor features without people feeling hot as much as possible. So environmental programs, they live on the basics of just turning off the lights and the power, and they go all the way as sophisticated in our company into the actual design of facilities.
Oh, excellent. How then, in terms of the operation, how are you looking at sort of the food and beverage offerings? Are you traditionally been serving buffets as part of the lunch and dinners or breakfast? Are you planning of doing something differently to address this issue, considering the...
Sure. So, I mean, this will sound like a real marketing message, but I can assure you, for the millions of Sandals past guests, it's not. Sandals sells love. Our tagline is "Love is all you need." And the whole company has been built, and all the operations have been built really with 2 top tables for 2 people. So we've been social distancing before social distancing was a thing. So of course we've changed, where the company will reopen with a new application where you won't have to any longer have a wine menu or a food and beverage menu in a restaurant. If you don't want to have those contact touch points, it'll be on the app. Every restaurant, every food offering. We'll bypass check-in for the entire company. Today, buffet lines, although we don't have very many of them, we're primarily a la carte. We'll have servers, so you don't have mixed use on the ladles. Social distancing on the floor. We've put 300 new jobs. We employ 15,000 people across the Caribbean. We've added 300 new positions, which are strictly for social distancing and protocol governance. So social distancing wardens, etc. We'll be tripling the measures on a day-to-day basis, where we're looking at the pH levels and the contaminants in our pools. So, every area. I mean, one of the things that was one of the trickiest things for us to figure out was we have a partnership with the Guild of English Butlers and have butler service in our suites and our top suites. And of course, they have white gloves, and the white glove we know can carry the virus. So we had to find a way to give white glove service without having the traditional white glove. And so we've had workarounds on everything. But I do believe that people will eventually level, and that people will eventually get used to the new normal, no different than when TSA came in and travel went from 45 minutes and a driver's license to getting on a plane to 2 hours and needing a passport. This will be the new normal, and we will do everything possible to make people feel comfortable until we find that new level.
Yeah. There's another question that comes up to you. The viewers are very curious and interested of your approach to things. The question is, how are you, or will you be partnering with airlines to help your guests navigate new guidelines? We are starting to see some strict guidelines domestically and even more stringent guidelines internationally, like Bahamas Air.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, there are a few different partners that have to work here. They are the rules and regulations that are imposed by the WHO or the CDC, in our world, the Pan American Health Authority. That will drive actions at the government level. We must separate the difference between private sector and public. The national protocols will dictate to us what we have to do as a minimum standard. In our private capacities, we have the ability to accelerate and do better. So a good example of that is in Jamaica. What is on the table and being proposed is any tour, catamaran, any bus, any kind of transportation is run at 50% capacity as an ability for social distancing. So a bus that would hold 30 people can only have 15 people. My company has taken the decision to put no more than 10 people on a bus so that we can effect wider social distancing. So it will have an increased cost of operations, but we don't see it lasting forever. But what we need to inspire right now in giving our consumers is that sense of confidence and peace of mind. So we will be operating. We're working hand in hand with the airlines. They're a critical feature to the success of tourism in my part of the world. But ultimately, they will be making their own decisions. And then once they come through the airport, we typically have an airport lounge, and that's when we first interact with our customers. So from taking them from the airport to the resorts on safe corridors that we've created in each of these islands, national training programs for everything, the bars on the side of the road and the street food vendors, and that list goes on, to the resort experience and back to the airport is really where we as hotel operators, that's our role.
Thank you. Over to you, Abid.
Oh, that is terrific, Adam. I wonder if the cleaning protocol that you have initiated, if there is some way that these thoughts can be codified into our daily operation industry-wide so that consumer will feel comfortable. Just about every organization has launched their own cleaning protocol, but for a consumer, it'll be far better if they know what exactly is being done industry-wide. Do you see that ever occurring?
Yeah, by the end of this week, I'll have a full video detailing. So we've gotten all the safety, health and safety equipment. Of course, we've had to bring it in from the US. And we're actually in the middle of creating a video and picture-led signage that we will publish, that we'll share. So our protocols are out there. You can see the 18-point checklist, the Platinum Protocol online. But we'll bring it to life in a video, which I think will bring a lot of peace of mind. So there's a natural hysteria around this virus, but doing things like cleaning air conditioning vents after every stay is a radical advancement to what the world would call a healthy and clean room. If you did it every 90 days, you're in good shape. If you did it every 30 days, you're in amazing shape. Doing it every 7 days is just next level stuff. And it's important to recognize that these are not central air conditioning systems. These are individual rooms. So there's no cross contamination between rooms. But we've said, you know what? We have to be the company. We've always been the company in the Caribbean to take the step first. We want to be the guinea pig, right? The most detailed health and safety protocols, abide by them. We have a feature in a company called the Sandals Corporate University, which is our training institute, international accredited. And we train constantly, and we want to show the world, not just Jamaica or the Caribbean, that it is going to be safe to move about again. And at the end of the day, travel is every one of us looks forward to a future trip, or what we're going to do with our friends or families or loved one. And the idea of losing travel in its freeness of today is a world that I just don't really want to be a part of. So we're trying to do everything possible to re-inspire our confidence in our consumers.
Well, I must tell you, your pictures on Instagram with your kids swimming in those turquoise blue lagoons, if that doesn't convince people what Caribbean is about.
I sit here in my house, and I live on the ocean in Jamaica, and I sit in these Zoom calls and Skype calls, and you get this sensation that the world is coming to an end. And then I look outside at the beautiful blue ocean, and I can tell you the only thing that's happening is Mother Nature is getting more beautiful by the minute. So we've all fallen into a place of hysteria. By no means am I minimizing the health risk that's been out there, but we're going to have to pivot the conversation from stay home and stay safe to living with COVID, and finding a way to get back to work, because there is no economy, there is no country, not the United States, not any one of the Caribbean states, that can afford to live in this kind of economic environment. So we gotta be safe and smart, but we have to find a way to start reopening the world and move ahead.
I think there are lots of great things that are being done on all different fronts to fight this bug. So hopefully we will be able to gain consumer confidence immediately. Before too long, hopefully there'll be a vaccination, and the world will come back. It is innate in our DNA that we want to be social. We want to interact with people, and being isolated, it just goes against our grain. Thank you so much, Adam. Thanks for that. Please stick around. There are other questions, but we'll come right back to you. Let me bring in our next guest, Jim O'Shaughnessy, who is Managing Director of Baring Real Estate Advisors. Jim, welcome to Hospitality Talks.
Thank you, Abid. I'm happy to be with you today.
Well, thanks for taking the time. I know you have invested in a lot of hospitality assets here. We find ourselves in a bit of a standstill environment. Talk about what your focus has been for the last couple of months, please.
Sure. Well, the focus looking backward really fell into two categories. As a real estate investment advisor and asset manager for investors in hotel real estate, we were practicing asset management procedures that any fiduciary must do, which is really to minimize cash burn, but at the same time balance the human component of what was going on that Adam was describing and it affected and impacted staff members, and also allowing for a rapid rebound. As an asset manager and advisor, we were very cognizant of the fact that these hotels are easier to shut down than they are to restart. And we wanted to make sure that the key staffing, financial, sales and marketing, and even operational, was able to be active and engaged in what eventually we know will be a restart. And the second thing that was keeping us busy, and I perhaps will talk about that a little bit later in the conversation, were debt negotiations. Not anyone's favorite subject, but most of our investors, like most real estate investors, do carry debt. And these were conversations and negotiations that had to be had quickly and professionally with multiple lenders over multiple assets.
Well, Jim, this is just as good of a time as any. Please talk about what has gone into the debt, because I know there are a lot of people, a lot of owners that are experiencing a bit of a pinch at this particular point. How have the lenders responded to you? How are you able to work with them? Can you shed some light on that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. First of all, to explain, at Barings Real Estate, we actually are a lender as well as a borrower. So my main focus is employing equity, but we also do lend against hotels. So we had the interesting situation of being on both sides of this difficult situation. I would say Barings and many of our colleagues in the lending industry have been extraordinarily flexible. And I'm not highlighting Barings there. Let's say talk about these other lenders, balance sheet lenders and others that have recognized this for what it is, which is an unprecedented period, and through no fault of borrowers, they were put in difficult cash flow positions. So to that end, we've seen relief on multiple fronts. If I were to summarize, I would say those fell into three major categories. Certainly waivers or deferrals of covenants and covenant tests, which of course are important, things like debt service coverage ratios or other operating ratios that might have put a property into a cash flow sweep or other lender-imposed penalty box, so to speak. Second was the accessing of the allowance to access FF&E reserves, which is a multiple-pronged negotiation because the brand, of course, has to agree to that if there is a brand in play, as well as the lender. And we found quite a bit of flexibility there with, of course, some kind of a programmatic approach to replenishing that FF&E reserve. And then finally, any range of waiver or deferral on essentially the principal portions of amortization. So essentially allowing loans to go to some form of an interest-only profile, perhaps on a 6-month to a 9-month basis. Those are the main features that we've been able to negotiate successfully, and we find, again, the industry pretty flexible and open-minded on this.
Are the capital markets still pretty active? Is debt readily available? Have you recently gone out and priced the debt as to what it looks like?
Well, we were, because we had one asset under contract before the current situation, we were kind of exploring and have put off the purchase, have been exploring ways to potentially finance this asset. I agree with Stephen's comments earlier that not only a good way to value assets, but a practical way to purchase them in the current environment is most likely to pay all cash, because the spreads have widened significantly and the universe of lenders has narrowed remarkably. So I'd say actually the debt capital markets for hotels right now are not tremendously liquid. Like some of our colleagues in the industry, we had made previous commitments to lend and actually recently finalized a loan on an asset for one of our borrowers post-COVID, but that was a commitment that was issued prior. Going forward, I think we need significantly more visibility for those debt markets to thaw and for those spreads to come in a little bit.
Has your focus relative to future acquisitions, has that changed in any way? Are you more interested in different markets than you might have been pre-COVID days? Are you underwriting these projects differently?
Sure. So I would say we're extremely interested in the investment potential right now in hotel. We have a long history in DNA in the hotel industry and are comfortable with the ups and downs. And of course, we all know that in our industry, we'd always love like in all real estate, we'd love our basis to be lower rather than higher. We're a strong believer that the industry will recover. So yes, we're interested. We're fortunate to have been a net seller of hotels over the last 5 or so years. So we've repatriated some capital to investors. I would say as to the underwriting approach, it's very similar to what Stephen described. We are looking at assets on an all-cash purchase basis, assuming some level of what we believe is conservative financing 12 months into the hold. Perhaps a subsequent refinancing at the 3-year mark when there might even be greater liquidity. And then as to the cash flows, of course, as Stephen described, it's very difficult to project, and I think you really have to go asset by asset. We're working with a baseline demand recovery model internally that is about 30 months. Again, that doesn't imply a return to pre-COVID NOI, but simply to demand. And I think that pushes in or out depending on the market segmentation profile of the asset and its location. So we're finding our underwriting has to be much more granular and to really look into the market segmentation of the hotel, group, transient, convention, and so forth, and try and make independent projections of those market segmentations to try and build a model that's somewhat robust. As to location, I don't think that it's changed dramatically. I mean, there's kind of two ways to look at it, I guess. If the underwriting is quite focused on short-term cash flow recovery, as we've talked about already in the call, domestic U.S. leisure destinations, more leisure transient, of course, could be more favored. And we believe they might recover quicker. And as a matter of fact, we've got examples of that in our portfolio right now. But perhaps one might take a longer view, a 5-year view of a hold, where greater discounts might be available to purchase assets that are very, very group dependent. We believe group will recover. So there might be an argument to look at some of those types of assets if the investor has the appetite and the interest and the ability to look for a longer term.
Are you still holding to your underwriting model of 5 to 7 years, or are you a little more forgiving for a longer horizon?
In the institutional investment world, we find it difficult to go outside of a 5 to 7 year hold. It's hard for people to get their head around a hold of that long. Now, we have one client who's actually our parent, a mutual life insurance company, Mass Mutual, that will look longer term because they truly are a very, very long-term investor. And that, again, can play to some of the strengths I just mentioned, perhaps being able to achieve, first of all, look at things not leveraged initially, and also perhaps longer than average holds.
And I'll turn it over to Sam here in a second. If cash transactions are what is being preferred, if all of a sudden debt markets have gone from very liquid, cheap money to almost illiquid and very expensive money, I guess it's going to further drop the valuations. I wonder if that would help or hinder the transaction volume. Any thoughts on that?
Right. I feel Stephen and I hadn't had a chance to talk about valuation before the call, but I feel that his kind of baseline, most likely valuation scenario of negative 27% in the short to medium term feels about right. And I would say, to answer your question more specifically, and maybe a little different than what was described before, I find that a lot of the buyers, not surprisingly, might be looking for discounts closer to 30%, and a lot of the sellers right now seem to be closer to 20%. So I think there is a bit of a bid ask, again, driven by what you said, Abid, which is this real need for the illiquidity of debt and the way that investors are underwriting the recovery, sellers being more aggressive and the buyers being less. And so that's one reason I think we've seen a lot of transactions. Hopefully those two parties will come closer together in their view as visibility improves.
Fair enough. Sam, over to you.
I think you mentioned earlier, but maybe I just want, if you can expand on the debt restructuring. Any thoughts on how this is panning out for the future?
Sure. I would say that the cooperation that I described was real. And on the other hand, it was all agreed to on the understanding that there was some kind of a temporary dislocation. 6 months, perhaps 9 months. I think what will be difficult for both the lenders and the borrowers is if we get out to the 6-month mark. So let's just say after Labor Day, and there is a real demand issue in the particular market or at the particular hotel. That is when I think we're going to see different reactions, because lenders, just by the nature of their commitments to where they source their funds, can't make more permanent, or it is very difficult for them to make more permanent accommodation. So we might see this kind of second wave of borrower-lender discussions that in some cases may not go as well because the hotel simply isn't recovering as quickly as both parties hoped. Thank you.
Over to you, Abid.
Sam, let's bring everybody together, and just another question for Jim. Jim, are you having active involvement in more assets coming on the market? What trends have you seen? I'm sure there are people that are just not going to be able to service their debt. Have you seen any trends relative to that?
Yes, Abid. I think there's essentially three things going on right now, and three different natures of the ability to invest in hospitality, like there always has been, but maybe the second and third scenarios are amplified. Of course, you can make an equity purchase of a piece of real estate, and that's what we describe, this bid-ask spread, maybe between the 20% and a 30% discount. Some of those transactions will happen. We found there is a significant bid-ask. The second scenario would be preferred equity investment, and I think that might be more common in the next 6 months. This might be termed another way as rescue capital. These are owners that are looking for incremental liquidity, by the way, in anticipation of lenders not being flexible forever and needing an ability to get through an extended period and needing to inject equity into the business and willing to give a preferred return. And I think there will be players in that area, and that's something that we would consider. And then finally, of course, there are discounted loan purchases or lenders in possession, one or the other. And unfortunately, for our industry, that certainly will happen. And I think that our structure of the commercial real estate structure will run its course, and there will be opportunities and things will get repriced. Unfortunately, some equity will be wiped out, but fortunately for us, I think the hotels themselves, the staff that work in them, will go on, but in a financially restructured way.
Yeah, the one of the news articles that had come out in New York, as a matter of fact, that the first tranche of CMBS of nearly $2.5 billion had already gone to the servicer. I'm sure all the conversations are being done. It's very active involvement to work that thing through so that you don't end up losing the assets or taking a haircut. But I'm sure everybody is actively involved in those conversations. Adam, a question for you. You have always had a very strong balance sheet. You were actively involved in the growth cycle. Can you talk about what growth looks like for you coming out of this pandemic?
Yeah, I think I mean, the balance sheet got strong because we as a family took some very conservative approaches to the repayment of debt over the years. So our company is levered, less than 1 time, and that has allowed us. So we are a bit of a different company. So we have a related party who is our sales and marketing engine and communications engine. We have a supply chain which does all the procurement of goods and services, and then we have the actual hotel company, which the world knows as Sandals Resorts International. So all of our resorts except one are completely owned by the group, with a very low debt ratio attached to it vis-a-vis the balance sheet. So, in times like these, in the last economic downturn, we acquired the former Four Seasons Great Exuma in the Bahamas. We go through a process of sandalization, which is where we put in all of our beautiful pools and higher-end suites, and we spent about $45 million converting that hotel, which was at the time 183 rooms and suites. It's now 249, into a Sandals product. So for us, this one is a tricky one. I'm listening very keenly to what Jim and Stephen and everyone is saying on this call as to timeline. But we are in a fairly unique position because Sandals is really the only consumer-facing super brand that's ever come out of the Caribbean. So we have the brand. We have this, about 45% of our business are past guests that have stayed with us before, that they know who we are and what we represent. And beyond that, we have an incredible culture and workforce, a very determined grit within our team members and our executive and our management teams to just get up and get things done. So we kind of are always at our finest, whether we have a hurricane or some kind of natural disaster. Everybody puts their best foot forward. There's a lot of tenure in our company, in excess of 20 years. Our COO has been in the company 30 years, and we have people that have been in our company before my dad founded Sandals Resorts in 1981 in his prior company. With that in mind, we tend to use our ability. We just bought 2 hotels in Jamaica for cash, which hasn't formally been announced, but people generally know. It was bought from a competitor who's a public company. And we have 2 more hotels that we're looking at now in 2 new islands that we're working on deals. So our view is that we will now put our balance sheet to the test. At this stage of the game, we'll use our cash reserves that we have, because we believe that there will be a recovery, and we do believe that people will sacrifice going on cruise ships in the short term because of those obvious more complex issues, and we do believe that people will probably forego going as far as Europe. The France and Italy, they've been very scarred. By no means am I saying that is anything detrimental or negative to those countries. They're amazing products. I myself love to travel there. But people will think twice about getting on an aircraft that has to fly 8 to 12 hours when they can be in the Caribbean in an hour and a half to 2.5 hours. So the Caribbean has always sort of been what we call the kind of darling of the Americas. And it's in the backyard, it's within reach, it's close. And people just, people come to the Caribbean for the weekend because its proximity is so close. So my own view on the future is that we all have an uphill battle to convince consumers. I believe we can do it, however. I believe we're close enough, so proximity is working in our favor. And for those companies that are well run, that are not highly leveraged, and that have the balance sheet to get them through this, it will become an opportunity. And I think my company is kind of at the front of the line, and so we will expand during this time. And short of something changing that we can't see at this stage, we're just being very smart about conserving operating expenses. We're not cutting any expenses that are in the consumer's touch points. Everything that we're doing is in the back of office, administration and efficiencies on the back end, more use of technology. Some companies still are signing checks, manually signing checks. Then we were told to stay home. All of a sudden you couldn't pay suppliers and vendors. So we've all had to figure out how we use digital technology quickly. And of course, with that, will if done smartly, will create more efficiency for the group overall. But probably the worst thing I think any hotel company could do right now is start nickel and diming the consumers.
Fair enough. Well, congratulations on the 2 new acquisitions, addition to your portfolio, and hopefully there will be many more announcements down the line with further acquisitions. Before I go to Stephen had brought up the delta between bid-ask. As you are looking at these assets, or does that, generally speaking, has that held true?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a bid-ask spread right now. I think it's going to narrow quite quickly because there's just so much dry powder, and there's been a lot of money being raised over the last 3 or 4 years, just waiting for an inevitable recession. Nobody knew when it was going to happen or how much it would impact us, but it's there, and I think 4 years from now, we are as an industry are going to look back at this present moment and say, "Boy, I should have bought more." And so now is the time to buy. You get a 20% discount to 2019 values. That's a 20% discount. That's great. And in 2 years, that's 2 or 3 years, that's going to be wiped out completely. So I think there's some people that have that mentality more than previous down cycles. The beauty of this down cycle is we know it's going to end. It's going to end when there's a vaccine, and there's a lot of confidence that vaccine will be here in the next 12 to 18 months. You take a look at other previous cycles, the GFC and 9/11 and in the mid-90s. When you were in the thick of that, you had no idea how long that was going to run for. People didn't know if that was the new norm for the next 5 years or if it was going to be 2 months. But since there's an event in the future and not too distant future where this will all turn around, that's going to really narrow the bid-ask spread quite quickly.
Stephen, have you noticed any trends relative to individual assets that are coming up on the market or portfolios that might be coming available for sale? And what does that look like? Domestically speaking, is most of the transaction, do you anticipate in select service or full service hotels?
Yeah, well, we haven't seen too much come on the market yet. So it's a bit early to tell, but my gut tells me you've seen a number of independent, more boutique-y properties that came to the marketplace in the last 18 months or so. They're not experienced hoteliers. The properties were maybe underperforming before before the whole COVID thing took place. And these are people who just don't really have the funds to support it anymore. And so they're just going to give the keys away to the lender. I think you're going to see that. I think that's probably going to be, my gut tells me it's going to be all over the place as far as asset classes are concerned. But that being said, we've gotten a mandate. We just got a mandate for a portfolio of resorts in Europe, so that's being impacted. And we've done quite a few stuff in Houston, the energy markets as well. So the energy markets were struggling, to the areas where there are energy markets, they were already struggling. And now with the recent collapse of gas prices are hurting even more. So whatever it's worth, that's the data we have.
So what does the prototypical buyer coming out of this pandemic looks like? Is it private equity? Is it sovereigns? Is it high net worth individuals?
All the above. All the above, at least from what I'm seeing. And this is just me. It's anecdotal, me talking to a lot of people. It's all of the above. There's been more than ever than any other cycle. There are a lot of well capitalized, very different types of buyers out there.
Well, that's great, and hopefully that'll keep the demand active, because people that have liked lodging sector and like the hospitality business, I think they are absolutely going to stay with it. This industry, as we all know, have experienced ups and downs throughout, but recovery always is stronger. So I'm sure it'll come back. Jim, are you working with some other capital sources, or do you typically go out on your own as a fund structure to look for the assets?
Sure, Abid. So we invest in a number of ways. We have raised commingled funds with multiple investors in the past. Currently, we tend to invest either on behalf of our parent directly and solely in assets, or with select clients, either family offices or large public pension funds. Those are the normal targets. Our sources of equity right now are really from Asia, Europe, and the United States. And I agree with Stephen that I think it's the common denominator will be comfort and comfort in the asset class, a sense of opportunity in the value, and cash. And those three things will come together actually with different buyer descriptions. As Stephen said, probably, or you asked, perhaps it's a sovereign, perhaps it's a high net worth family office, or private equity, and even institutions. But that confluence of those three factors has to be there to move quickly in the short term.
I guess the industry is going to evolve. We continue to underwrite these projects, and the valuations will be what they are. Have you seen a major shift in cap rates, or do you see that going forward? And that's for you, Jim.
Sure. I mean, I think there is one risk, and I'd be curious on Stephen's thoughts as well. One thing that I've heard from some of our institutional investors who perhaps are not as focused on hospitality investments, they view what has happened to hotels and also to retail as possibly a bit of a game changer in the risk-adjusted return that might be required. So that is a risk, that whatever the cash flows are and whatever cap rate you might apply, perhaps the cap rate or discount rate, depending on how you look at it, has adjusted or needs to be adjusted going forward because of this amplification, let's say, of the fact that we are an industry of one-day leases, as my brethren in the commercial real estate side would say. So that bears watching, and could cause some of the most conservative investors to reprice a set of cash flows pre and post COVID, or price them in a different way.
It's funny you bring out the nightly lease model. I had a major debate with a quant guy. He was saying that, hey, look, I don't know how you could classify hospitality as an asset class because you guys don't have leases. But in this world, I'm sure people that have office buildings as an asset class, if your tenants are not able to make the rent, they're going to terminate the leases. And as a matter of fact, office operating model might be totally changed as we come out of it. People have gotten used to conducting business digitally, so I'm not sure what the office model will look like, but it's an interesting conversation. Stephen, do you have any thoughts on what Jim brought up?
Yeah, so I mean, it's cap rates will, at least in the short term, so next 18 months or so, will go up, probably about 150 basis points or so. I mean, historically, during a recession, you see them going up about 150 basis points, and then they go down again as things improve. But you saw cap rates remain relatively, healthy during the previous cycle, because you did have a lot of people who were in other forms of commercial real estate making a lateral transition into hotels because things were stable for 10 years. And they thought, hey, we're getting much better returns on hotels than my office space or my retail space. What's how tough can it be? How bad can it be? So there'll definitely be an adjustment period going on. But I would imagine in 4 years from now, people's memories will sort of evaporate a little bit, and people will be chasing the returns, and that will push cap rates down again.
I think human beings are very resilient, and at times we have very short-term memories, which is a good thing. because we will live through that and we will come out of it. I know we're approaching the end. Sam, are there any other questions that might have come up that you might have?
Yes, we have Jay Jingran, who's viewing this broadcast on LinkedIn. He's a hotelier, and this is a question to Adam. I wonder what the repeat guest factor is for Caribbean out of US, as Europeans may not be traveling there soon, or at least till winter 2020-21.
It's a great question. You know, islands like Jamaica, Jamaica has the #1 repeat guest factor in the Caribbean, with over 50% of all visitors that we have every year have visited Jamaica at least once before. So, I mean, our best customer is the repeat customer. They know, you know, people, when you're taking a chance and you go into somewhere new, there's always a risk that it's not, you know, where you end up is not for you, or you didn't like it. Time is precious. You want to waste the opportunity, or you don't want to waste the opportunity, rather. So of course, for those of us that have very high repeat clientele, you know, we can get 50% of our baseline business in a repeat client. Then you only have to find the other 50% to have a successful operation or hotel. So I think one of the greatest advantages is, you know, our part of the world is so rich with culture and fascinating history between the French and the Spanish and the British rule, you know, the Taino Indians over time. Out of that, things like, you know, the birth of reggae music, the spices, jerk chicken, and the different spices of the Caribbean. And the Caribbean is a more eclectic place than meets the eye. It's not just sun, sand, and sea. We have beautiful rivers. We have beautiful mountains. You know, in the mountains in Jamaica, you know, this time of day, this time of year, it's in the 50s. Homes with fireplaces you would never imagine in the UNESCO World Heritage Blue Mountain. So I could go on and on about product. I come from a place that I believe that it is all about the product to begin with. And if you have a great product, then you've created a demand item. And with a demand item, you will get natural consumption. So we have invested so heavily in these regions of the world because we first fell in love with the islands that we went to. You know, we found it in Jamaica, then went to Antigua, then St. Lucia, then the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, Grenada, now Barbados, and looking at 2 new islands, which I mentioned. There is something magical about each and every one of these islands, and that's why the Caribbean has been so fascinating to visitors year after year. So that's my long-winded way of saying that they will be our best customers coming back, but they come back because the product is so interesting and fascinating and close to home.
Thank you.
You know, Adam, you are really making it hard for people to stay home.
I live it every day. I'm telling you, when I'm not working, I'm on a boat somewhere in the Caribbean sailing. That's I tell people all the time, I work to buy diesel fuel to put in my boat. And because I'm in love with the life that we live in this part of the world. And it's just my view, but it's, you know, it never gets old. It's beautiful.
Absolutely.
It's about time for some feel-good stories here to top up our segment.
Let's start with Adam. If Adam, you don't mind, tell us some of the feel-good stories in the islands, some of the things that you're doing, some things that you might have noticed.
I mean, look, as a company, we you know, we started this process off saying, how can we help? We started off buying 40 ventilators in Jamaica. Luckily for our company, we were able to retain all of our team members. We have them on full health and medical benefits, dental benefits. We've done a lot of national work, working with the countries, as I mentioned, drafting protocols and pulling together. And I think overall, you know, we're in a very tricky place because we're not yet reopened, but we can see it coming. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think this will bring an element of a reset, but it will bring an opportunity, bring a litany of opportunities to the industry overall. So I've already started getting phone calls from suppliers and people that make money on selling Caribbean travel or supply. A great example is, you know, Tito's Vodka gave us $25,000 to funnel through a Sandals Foundation, of which 100% of those proceeds go to the community. We have worked with American Airlines, we've worked with Coca-Cola. We have dental and medical missions that we bring to the islands. So we outfit about 3,500 Caribbean nationals every year with free optician checkups and glasses. We do about 12,000 medical. I mean, we do things like 3,000 root canals of people who can't afford it. Those medical missions, people are doubling down, and they're saying they're ready to come. You can get more information on that at the sandalsfoundation.org. And I think, you know, there is more good in the world than people realize if you can find a way to channel it and pull it together. For me, as a Caribbean national, I just feel extremely proud to see the unity. I've never, ever before in my life seen, I've been 25 years in the hospitality industry from I was a young teenager. I have never seen competitors set their differences aside. I've never seen public and private sector pull together more. We are all working to a similar end game, and it has brought a level of reality that I think was probably needed years and years ago, and people are acting the way they should act if we're going to defend global hospitality. So airlines with hospitality, with taxi drivers, small, micro, medium, large enterprises, governments on both sides of the political divide, associations, everyone sitting down and being smart and mature and setting aside self-interest for the bigger cause. And that to me is probably the biggest underscore. And Abid, since you follow me on Instagram and social media, you would have seen on Saturday, I sent out a post just saying, you know, rather than everybody being so critical, let's actually let's give a round of applause to the people that are selfless and have worked night and day through this pandemic, not just the frontline workers, but them too, but those in the background that have gotten us to where we are in the reopening. So we can have political differences and views, but the truth is that people are really trying to pull through this.
And that is what quintessential hospitality is all about. And I'm glad the industry is coming together. There is a movement that has started. We had started that hashtag Hospitality Heroes. Please share the stories on that hashtag, because it is all about recognizing the people that are coming together. I'm going to come to Stephen next. Stephen, anything that you would like to share, anything that you have noticed from the industry point of view?
Oh, well, Adam's statements were just so amazing. I could really top that. Boy, very well spoken, Adam. Thank you for sharing that, inspiring, bringing a good positive energy message to all of us. You know, just there's so much. This has really brought the best out of people. It's really brought people together, and there's tremendous opportunity during these times. And increasingly, more and more people are starting to recognize that. And so try not to be let down by you know, the negative forces that are out there, and always try to find the bright spots in things.
Fantastic. And last but certainly not least, Jim, anything that you might have learned about yourself during this stay-home time period? Anything that you have seen in the industry?
Oh, I didn't expect the first part of the question. What I learned about myself is I need to find a place for a haircut, but I'll work on that. But more importantly and more seriously, I do echo Adam's thoughts. The teams in the hotels, who are really the teams of the managers that we work with, both brands and independents, have been remarkable and admirable in their courage and their fortitude. From financial controllers doing cash flow forecasting late at night to housekeeping managers putting together these return to service protocols, I can't even imagine what they've gone through. So we appreciate all of that. And best is to see that in some of our hotels now, you know, we are looking at how to manage the demand. Imagine that, manage the demand for Memorial Day weekend in a couple of resorts. And I'm just so pleased about that, because that means that people are going back to work, that families are going to see better paychecks, and just the vibrancy of those communities. Some of the things Adam talked about, 2 of these resorts are one in Florida, one in Arizona, that bring an echo effect to local restaurants, transportation, destination service providers, tour operators. We'll start to see that over the Memorial Day weekend for the first time in many months, and I'm very pleased about that and thankful for those that made it happen.
That is fantastic. Thank you for that. And before I turn it over to Sam to conclude, thank you, Adam, thank you, Jim, and thank you, Stephen, for participating. It is all about Reboot. At this point, we are all focused on how we're going to get started and gain consumers' confidence. We really appreciate your time, really appreciate your insight. Also, thanks to all of the viewers that joined us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook. It has been a very active session. So we'll see you in a couple of days for our next episode of Hospitality Reboot. Thanks for joining us. Over to you, Sam.
Well, this was a very uplifting and inspirational segment we had today. So thank you very much to all the panelists, but also more importantly, thank to all the live viewers and also the replay viewers who will be watching this later on. If you are viewing us on YouTube and it's your first time, just press subscribe and then press that notification bell so to let you know then when we are next going to be on live. And if you are viewing us on LinkedIn on this segment, then just by following me, Sam-Erik Ruttmann, you will also be notified when we are next live. So with that ado, I just want to say thank you very much for joining us. And also we had someone from Facebook saying great talks. Unfortunately, I don't see the name, but so we had also Facebook viewers here today. So thank you very much for everyone who have joined us, and we'll see you in the next couple of days.